Hello and welcome to week 1 of Intermediate Spanish. This video we're just going to briefly do some review on present tense conjugations of irregular verbs. If you're taking an intermediate course, obviously you should already relatively understand what a conjugation is. You should understand how to conjugate regular present tense verbs. We're going to be going over some of the very common irregular verbs that you do need to learn how to use. So if you have your sheet out in front of you, at the top it should say present tense irregular verbs. That's what we're going to go through. We're just going to kind of practice with some of these verbs, but this way you can get a visual and you can hear what they sound like. And then there will be a brief activity to do afterwards that I'll ask that you send back to me. So let's start with some of the verbs that have a really weird yo form. These are verbs that, in general, the rest of the verb, the to, the el, ella, usted version, nosotros, everything, tends to stay the same as a regular pattern for conjugated verbs, but the yo form is quite different. And again, these are very common verbs. So we have poner, which means to put or to put on, the first verb on your list there, and going across from left to right. Yo pongo, tú pones, él pone, nosotros ponemos, ellos ponen. The next verb in the list, salir. Salir means to leave or to go out of. And the yo form has that G, which we also saw with poner. Salgo. Instead of salo, you say salgo. Salgo, sales, sale, salimos, salen. Oír, which means to hear, that verb also has that weird kind of go form. Some Spanish instructors like to refer to them as the go verbs because there's a nice little set of verbs that in the yo form will conjugate into with a G in there. It really just has to do with sound, and you know, that's not something I really focus on a lot. I don't like to categorize stuff too much, just to kind of help you see some of the differences. But with oír we see oigo, oyes, oye, oímos, oyen. So if you hear the word oímos un ruido, it means we hear a sound. These are all present tense. Dar, which means to give. Doy has that Y there instead of just do. Doy, das, da, damos, dan. So dan is ellos dan, ellas dan, ustedes dan, so that's you all give. Damos, we give. Da, he, she, it gives. Das, you give informally, and doy, I give. Saber, very common verb, and that verb is to know, generally with knowledge or information. And the yo form is sé. It is not sabo, sé. So many Spanish students get that confused, and they always, even quite frankly, native Spanish speakers I hear sometimes saying sabo, sé. So yo sé means I know. Sé, sabes, sabe, sabemos, saben. The next verb we're going to look at with a very weird yo form is hacer, which is another common one to make or to do. Hago, haces, hace, hacemos, hacen. So again, if you look at those verbs, the yo form is really different, and then the rest of them kind of sort of follow suit. Oír is a little bit different because they throw that Y in there in a few of them, and that's really, again, just to make sure that it carries the same sound. There are verbs, however, that change their root. So when you conjugate them into the to form or the he, she, it form, their stem, their root, actually changes. A really common one we have with that is tener. In the yo form, it's just a little irregular. It's one of those go verbs, so to speak. Tengo, which means I have. But then when you get into the rest of them, it's not tenes, like you would think. It's tienes. So that E, that first E in tener changes to an IE, which is why they call it stem changer. So it goes tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos. You'll see a lot of the nosotros forms tend to stay the same even when they're irregular. Tienen, the ustedes, el, ella form. Venir, which means to come. Vengo, vienes, viene, venimos, vienen. Pedir, which means to ask for, to request, used a lot at restaurants, you know, if you're ordering a taco or anything like that, or if you, generally with questions, not so much. It's more when you want to request somebody that they do something. and that E changes to an I. So we have pido, pides, pide, pedimos. Again, the nosotros form doesn't change. Piden. Morir, the next verb, which means to die. A little morbid, but a verb we all have to learn. Muero, mueres, muere, morimos, mueren. Again, look at that O, and what happens to it? It changes to a UE. Mentir, which means to lie. Miento, mientes, miente, mentimos, mienten. And then I just decided to throw a few verbs on here. Ser is one of them. We're going to look at ser and star in another video, but just to go over the conjugation for that, because again, it's highly irregular. And ir is another example of a verb that is highly irregular. Ir means to go. Obviously one we're going to use a lot, especially when we start talking about the future tense. So ir conjugates as follows: voy, vas, va, vamos, van. And then ser, which means to be in a permanent setting, permanent situation. Soy, eres, es, somos, son. So those are just a few of the irregular verbs. Remember, when you're conjugating in the regular form in Spanish, it only tends to get used when you're talking about something that you do on a certain amount of repetition. I go to the store every Saturday. Or if you're just saying I am with ser, it's, I am this, I am a teacher, I am that. Tengo, tener, I have stuff. Venir, I come, every Thursday to bingo. So again, these are all present tense verbs, so it's either in the moment, I'm asking something or doing something, or something that happens on a regular basis. So just kind of keep that in mind. As we talk about present tense, it's not used quite as frequently as we think it would be, but it's still something that we need to learn how to use. And it's also important to pay attention to how these things are changing, and then what the infinitive of the verb looks like, because you also need to know how to use the infinitive of the verb, because when you have verbs that follow other verbs, and this isn't something we're actually going over in class, but I think it's good review. If you have two verbs next to each other, you don't have to conjugate the second verb as long as they're kind of attached to the same subject. So for example, one of the verbs that wasn't listed in here, but you'll be going over in I think in your vocabulary build, this is the verb querer, which means to want or to love in certain situations. So that's conjugated quiero, it's a stem changer, quieres, quiere, queremos, quieren. But if you were to use that in conjugation with another verb, let's say for example with the verb saber, which means to know. And my sentence is, I want to know the truth. I conjugate I want with quiero, but then when I say to know, I just leave it as saber. So quiero saber la verdad. And so when you use multiple verbs, you conjugate the first one, and then you don't conjugate the second one if they're part of the same subject. You can have sentences that have two subjects, two thoughts or ideas, and that's a different situation. But with a lot of your sentences, if you have a verb and it's immediately followed by another one, chances are the second verb is not going to be conjugated. So do keep that in mind. So beyond this, there's a short activity that I'm asking you to do with the worksheet. I'm going to be asking you to pick out 5 verbs that you think are more common, that you'll use more frequently. Obviously, you may use more than that, but your kind of top 5 that you really think are going to be important for work or home or school, whatever. And then I would like you to try to create some sentences based on those verbs. And you could go outside of that if you want to change it up a little bit, flexible, but I'd like you to create sentences in English first off, and then push yourself to try to create a Spanish translation of that sentence. Remember, keeping it in the present tense. Don't switch outside of the present tense. And you can write those out on the sheet after printing it out, scan it and email it to me, or you can just put it to me in an email. And give me a day or two, and I will get back to you with some feedback on those sentences and give you some ideas for corrections. So that's it for this video, and I will see you in the next one.